What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be going through my Week 2 tight end start sits, breaking down every single Week 2 matchup, talking about every single fantasy-relevant tight end, and then listing them as either a start, fringe option, or sit. The starts are going to be the tight ends you feel confident throwing into your lineup. The fringe options, they're fine, they're playable, but they're not ideal. More of like your back-end tight end ones, your high-end tight end twos, and then sits are going to be tight ends you would prefer to keep on your bench. Now, no beating around the bush here. Week 1 was horrible for tight ends. I was high in the position. I thought we had a lot of guys who had some decently high ceilings, could compete to be high-end tight end ones, and Week 1 was a disaster. We only had 5 guys hit 10 plus PPR points, and 2 of them were Saints tight ends, and neither of those 2 were Taysom Hill. So we'd like Foster Moreau, Jawan Johnson as top 5 tight ends on the week, and Isaiah Likely was the only guy who broke 15 points. So hopefully here in Week 2, we get a bounce back with the position. But starting off here with Thursday night, we have the Bills taking on the Dolphins. And I want to talk about Dalton Kincaid here because I think he was someone that people were very high on heading into this year. We thought he was going to be this high upside dude playing with Josh Allen, and he went out and had a complete dud in Week 1. 1 reception for 11 yards. Now, on the positive side, the usage wasn't terrible. 83% route participation. That's solid. That's a solid starting tight end in the NFL. So I'm not full-blown panicking here on Dalton Kincaid. I know some people probably aren't feeling great, but I do have, some minor concerns here because Dalton Kincaid, of all these top tight ends, he was the most unproven guy. You're looking at like the top 4, Kelsey, Laporta. Obviously, Kelsey's proven. Laporta had an amazing rookie season. You have Trey McBride, who was a 15 PPR point per game guy once he became the starter last year. And then you had Mark Andrews, who's also very proven. Kincaid was somewhat unproven, and he wasn't necessarily drafted on like what we had actually seen out on the field. Like, he's a good prospect, had a decent year 1, but we were banking on this like massive year 2 breakout with the upside of being the potential number 1 target on a Josh Allen-led offense. And so it's only Week 1, but it would have been nice to see him go out there, kind of be a focal point of the offense. We didn't really see that. So like I said, I'm not full-blown panicking. A little worried, maybe, but he could definitely go out in Week 2, bounce back, and he is going to be a start for me here. You drafted him as like a top 5, top 6 tight end. He's obviously going to be in your lineups, and then hopefully we're seeing a better Week 2. They're going to be sitting their tight end to Dawson Knox. For the Dolphins here, I think some people were interested in Jonnu Smith as like a sleeper option at the tight end position. He just didn't have a high enough route participation. I don't think we're going to see any fantasy relevant tight ends for the Dolphins, so Jonnu Smith is going to be a sit. Then we're going to shift over to Sunday, where we have the Raiders taking on the Ravens. Definitely one of the stronger tight end matchups. Honestly, can't remember since like I've started doing these tight end start sits. I don't think I've ever had 3 tight ends in one matchup that I've listed as starts. But here we are here with the Raiders-Ravens. For Brock Bowers, I feel like he had a really solid debut, 78% route participation. He led the Raiders with 7 targets, which was pretty fun. 6 receptions for 58 yards. Definitely one of the better tight end performances of the weekend. So as a rookie, coming in, already being a big piece of this offense, I think that's pretty encouraging moving forward, and I do like him as a start here. And then for these Ravens tight ends, I feel like Isaiah Likely was like 100% the story of the tight end position in Week 1. He was someone where the past couple of seasons, he's been pretty much like the only tight end handcuff, where normally if the starting tight end goes down, the backup is useless for fantasy. But he had been a guy where Mark Andrews gets injured, Isaiah Likely steps in and is giving you like top 10 production at the tight end position. So I think maybe we thought he'd be a little bit more involved, early on in the season here, even with Andrews healthy. But I don't think, really anyone expected him to do what he did in Week 1. 12 targets, 9 receptions, 111 receiving yards, and a touchdown. Almost had a second touchdown to send that game to overtime or give the Ravens an opportunity to win it. And like I said, he saw a much larger role here in Week 1, had a 69% route participation, ran only 3 fewer routes than Mark Andrews. So their usage was very, very similar here. So I definitely think Isaiah Likely is playable moving forward. Now, do I think he's going to be like the tight end 1 here? Is he going to replicate, what he did in Week 1 moving forward? I'm not, getting that crazy with it. I think he'll be fine. I think he's probably like in that tight end 8 to 10 area, somewhere in there. But definitely fun if you drafted him as like a late round flyer or were able to scoop him up off of the waiver wire. And then for Mark Andrews, I'm guessing a lot of people who drafted him highly, round 4, round 5, we're watching that, Thursday night game and not feeling great because you had the guy you thought was the tight end 2 going out, balling out, and Andrews wasn't doing a ton. I'm not panicking here on Andrews. I'd be lying if I said I felt as good about him as I did heading into week 1, but he still had a 75% route participation. It's not like he's been displaced as the tight end 1 here, and this was actually the most that Mark Andrews had been doubled in a game dating back to 2021. So the Chiefs put a ton of focus on him. I don't think that's something defenses are going to be able to do moving forward because clearly, if you put a lot of attention on Mark Andrews, Isaiah likely can beat you also. So I think Mark Andrews is still very startable. Obviously, week 1 was not ideal, but I still think he'll be a nice option moving forward. And if someone's like completely flipping out, they think Isaiah likely is the tight end 1, I would be willing to buy low here on Mark Andrews. Moving over to the next matchup, we have the Chargers taking on the Panthers. Not a ton to talk about here. Hayden Hurst actually had a decent route participation, but at this point, the only pass catcher I'd really be looking to start here would be Ladd McConkey. And then for the Panthers, Jatavian Sanders as a rookie coming in, earning the starting job is fun, but on this Panthers offense with Bryce Young at quarterback, tough to get super excited about him as a fantasy option. We're going to have the Saints taking on the Cowboys, and like I said at the top, the Saints tight end room kind of dominated for fantasy, and it was not really the guys you'd be expecting. Like Taysom Hill is the guy that coming into the season I thought would be the playable option here at the tight end position. Not really a tight end, but he has that designation on some platforms. But we saw Foster Moreau, Juwan Johnson both go out, catch touchdowns. Moreau was the tight end 2 on the week. Juwan Johnson was the tight end 5. And even though they were both top 5 guys, I don't think either one of them is playable here. They are in a very firm split, so it's not like they're both on the field a ton. Foster Moreau had a 54% route participation. Juwan Johnson was 46. So they're splitting those routes pretty close to 50-50, which on an offense that I don't think is going to be amazing moving forward is completely unplayable for fantasy. I really think it was just a one-off that these guys both had decent performances. Taysom Hill, despite being the tight end 3 on his own team in terms of fantasy points, I do think has usage that is playable. He ran 6 routes in week 1. He was targeted twice, had 5 carries. Once you're getting outside the top like 12-ish tight ends, you're kind of just hoping for guys that can get into the end zone. So tight ends on good offenses who are, solid with good route participations, or a guy like Taysom Hill who could get some red zone work, some goal line carries, can be used creatively, could throw for a touchdown. So Taysom Hill, if you punt at the position, I still think he's fine to start. The usage wasn't amazing in week 1, but it's still, stuff that could come through where he could take 5 carries, turn it into 30 yards and a touchdown, catch a pass, and that's playable production for you. On the other side for the Cowboys, not sure if Jake Ferguson is going to be able to play in this one. If he's good to go and we're not hearing stuff about him being limited, then he would be a start. If he's limited, he'd be more of like a fringe option, still has the touchdown upside. If he's out, obviously, you're not going to play him. And then Luke Schoonmaker, I guess, is somewhat interesting, but I would hope you'd have a better option at the tight end position or a potential, streamer here if Jake Ferguson did miss. Up next, we have the Buccaneers taking on the Lions. For the Buccaneers here, just not a ton of interest in Cade Otton. I just don't think he's a super relevant guy. It's Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Rashad White. Those are, the weapons you want in that Buccaneers offense. And then for the Lions, Sam Laporta really didn't do anything in week 1. I'm not worried. Had a great rookie season last year. Still a good offense. You're obviously firing him up as a high-end tight end 1. Looking at this Colts-Packers matchup, for the Colts, really just nothing going on at the tight end position. I'm sitting Kylan Granson. For the Packers here, I think it's notable, at least long-term, Tucker Kraft has replaced Luke Musgrave as the tight end 1. Musgrave was the tight end 1 last year, was banged up, came back. They were in somewhat of a split. He was a higher-picked guy. Last year, he was the top option. Tucker Kraft, I believe, had like a torn pec this offseason, and Tucker Kraft has still managed to displace Luke Musgrave here. I think he's 100% droppable. Musgrave is moving forward. Tucker Kraft had an 81% route participation to Luke Musgrave's 22%. I think in the short term, if Jordan Love is not playing, I don't think Tucker Kraft is playable, even if he is the tight end 1. But if Jordan Love comes back, when Jordan Love comes back, I do think Tucker Kraft's probably more of like a fringe option where he could be playable if you are desperate and just could continue to build because he hasn't really gotten a real crack at being like the true tight end 1 for a prolonged period of time. So interesting, but not here in week 2. We're going to have the Browns taking on the Jaguars. Seems like David Njoku's going to miss some time here, unfortunately, with an ankle injury. I like Njoku. I think he's super talented. I will say, though, based on what we saw to Deshaun Watson, I don't know if David Njoku is going to be putting up great production, but if you did draft him, it's still going to be a hit to your lineup. So Jordan Akins, their backup, zero interest in playing him. For the Jaguars here, I do think we have to temper expectations with Evan Ingram, with Christian Kirk healthy. I know he had a great season last year, but a lot of those boom games were when Christian Kirk was injured out of the lineup. So I still think he's playable on a decent offense, proven player, but he's definitely more towards like the tight end 8, 9, 10 area in terms of how I'd be ranking these guys. Looking at the Niners-Vikings matchup, for the 49ers here, George Kittle's never going to have a super high weekly floor just because there are so many mouths to feed here. Didn't do anything crazy in week 1, but you're obviously going to play him. He has a very high ceiling and is just a super talented player on a really good offense. For the Vikings here, until TJ Hawkinson's back, I just don't think any of these guys are going to be fantasy relevant, so sitting Josh Oliver. Then we have the Seahawks taking on the Patriots, and I have both of these guys listed as sits this week, but I think both these guys are interesting moving forward because starting off here with Noah Fant, he's getting the tight end 1 routes. Previous years, since he's been traded to the Seahawks, they've been running a tight end by committee. Shane Waldron's gone. Noah Fant is now the clear-cut tight end 1. So if this passing attack looks good, they log some solid games, I do think Noah Fant could be an interesting option. And then kind of a similar thing here for Hunter Henry. Solid route participation. I just don't know if he's ever going to be playable with Brissett at quarterback, but if Drake May could come in, win that job, kind of bring some ceiling to this offense, I think Hunter Henry could be playable because this wide receiver room is kind of up in the air at this point. Looking at another guy who's kind of in that same grouping, Tyler Conklin of the Jets. They're going up against the Titans. Conklin had a really strong route participation. He just didn't command any targets. So could just be, he's running cardio out there moving forward. Could also just be, game 1, not a huge sample size. If he maintains that route participation, this Jets offense looks good, continues to get better, Rodgers looks more comfortable, another guy who could start to emerge as a playable option. But here in week 2, he's a sit. For the Titans, Chigo Okonkwo had a decent game, but this is a firm tight end by committee here. He's not dominating the routes, so he is definitely going to be a sit for me. 2 sits in this next matchup between the Giants and the Commanders. I will say Theo Johnson has come in as a rookie and earned the tight end 1 spot. He had a strong route participation in week 1. This is just not an offense I want like a rookie tight end on. It's pretty much Malik Neighbors or bust in terms of their like pass catching weapons. And then for the Commanders, Zach Ertz is operating as their current starter. He's a sit. I'd like to see Ben Sinnott, kind of work his way into this offense, but until that happens, I don't think the Commanders' tight end position is going to be playable. We have a divisional matchup between the Rams and the Cardinals, and I think Colby Parkinson is interesting. Definitely someone who could be picked up on waivers as, like a filter-in tight end, someone you can play in your lineup if you don't love what you have. He had an 82% route participation, 5 targets, 4 receptions, 47 yards. Should benefit from Puka Nacua missing some time, some of those targets kind of getting dispersed with these other weapons. So an interesting option, probably like a high-end tight end 2 at this point. And then for the Cardinals, Trey McBride didn't have a terrible week 1, at least in terms of like PPR scoring. Wasn't great. I believe he led the team in targets. I really have no concerns with Trey McBride, and he'd probably be like my tight end 2 rest of season. So still feel good about him. In this Steelers-Broncos matchup, almost like another grouping of these tight ends where maybe there could be something going forward, but not in week 2. I was worried about Pat Freiermuth's usage based on the preseason. He was in a pretty firm split with Darnell Washington. It wasn't quite as bad in week 1, but right now, just looking at the Steelers offense, I think when you're looking at the pass catchers, it's pretty much George Pickens or bust at this point. And then for the Broncos, Greg Dulcich, pretty solid route participation. Looks like they're clear tight end 1. We're just going to need to see some chemistry between him and Bo Nix. At least a game or 2 where he's earning some targets. I think the talent's there, so definitely someone to monitor, but in terms of playing him week 2, would definitely prefer not to. We've got the Bengals taking on the Chiefs. For the Bengals, looked like Mike Gesicki almost had a touchdown catch, ended up getting called back. He's just not running a high enough, percentage of routes to want to play him here, so he's going to be a sit. For the Chiefs, Travis Kelce, kind of, a down week 1, not worried. You fire him up as a high-end tight end 1. Obviously, he's going to be a start. Sunday Night Football, we have the Bears taking on the Texans. And this is something I talked about before week 1 throughout the preseason. I did not like Cole Kmet. I had him way low in my tight end rankings. I, listed him as a do not draft, I think in at least one video, and he is unplayable at this point. He's not even the Bears tight end one. Like, he has been displaced by Gerald Everett. He had a 36% route participation. Gerald Everett's route participation was 64%. So Kmet, he's droppable. He really should not be on rosters unless you're in like a monster league. So sitting Gerald Everett, sitting Cole Kmet. For the Texans, Dalton Schultz is obviously not going to have a super high weekly floor. He's kind of buried behind these stud wide receivers, Nico Collins, Stephon Diggs, Tank Dell, but he's on a good offense. He's a good player and has some touchdown upside. So I do think he kind of fills in here as a fringe option. And then the final game of the week, Falcons taking on the Eagles. For the Falcons, we finally got to see Kyle Pitts in the end zone. The thing with Kyle Pitts is I like him as a talent. I think he's really good. The argument in favor of him this year, where like he hasn't really panned out in previous years, was that he finally has the quarterback play. The problem is I don't actually know if he has the quarterback play. This is something I talked about with Drake London. Kirk Cousins did not look good in week one. I think long-term it's not the worst thing in the world because if Kirk struggles, you still have Michael Penix who could come in and be solid right away. So a little worried about Pitts just based on the quarterback play, but I know the talent's there and he's still someone I'm starting. And then for the Eagles, Dallas Goedert's going to be a fringe option for me. Not a super high weekly ceiling guy, doesn't have the highest floor, but he's a solid player on a good offense. He's going to be in like that back end tight end one area. And that's going to wrap it up for every single week 2 tight end matchup. If you have any fantasy questions, drop them down below. I'll make sure to get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.